Police arrest 450 people and seize more than 100 weapons in a countrywide crackdown on gangs.
I'm Louise Watt in Beitou in northern Taipei for a report on how Japan's close cultural ties with Taiwan are turning into close political relations too.
Also ahead, consumer confidence plummets to a 12-year low. And we speak to Taiwan's youngest player on the international chess team as she heads to India for the world's biggest tournament. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Police have arrested nearly 500 suspects and seized more than 100 firearms as part of a crackdown on organised crime launched earlier this month. A spate of shootings in central and southern parts of the country prompted officials to tackle gang-related violence. But as Rick Lau reports, organised crime's relationship with Taiwan's society and politics runs deep.
A witness recording of a woman being dragged kicking and screaming into a vehicle. She was later trafficked overseas. Police have now apprehended the father and son team behind this, in a crackdown launched earlier this month that has seen 450 people arrested across 68 criminal organizations.
相关的查会、自爆、查选举的赌盘等等相关的，包括打诈、诉枪。我们会有一系列的行动。
120 firearms have already been seized. Execution-style killings in mid-July rocked the country and prompted leaders to promise to tackle gun violence.
这支手枪来源多半是靠走私哦，价格也昂贵。那像是一把短枪至少要20到30万元，但改造枪支它凭着原本的玩具操作枪跟模拟枪来改，从最少的2万块起跳到5万元不等。
Among those arrested in the crackdown, this man, accused of working as a bodyguard for leaders of the Bamboo Union, a known criminal organization linked to pro-China groups.
出示印有某特定政党主席之友会会长头衔的名片，并表明系某特定政党及竹联帮身份，恐吓被害人。
Organized crime in Taiwan often spills over into local politics.
Some of the politicians, they are directly or indirectly related to those organized crime. Sounds like maybe they are ex-gang member. So those politicians, they can use their influence in the parliament or the local congress to influence those policy or influence to the police department.
The government has set up a separate task force to tackle election-related violence and bribery ahead of local polls in November.
Organised crime may be entrenched in Taiwan's society and politics and often go unnoticed. But the uptick in gun violence this month left many people here feeling uneasy. The recent police crackdown may not be enough to assuage those fears. Karma Xu and Rick Lowett in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
President Tsai Ing-wen says Taiwan will deepen cooperation with Japan and other democratic partners to safeguard regional peace and stability. Tsai made the comments to Japanese lawmakers who are visiting Taipei. Their 4-day trip is aimed at enhancing security ties between Taiwan and Japan. The delegation includes 2 former Japanese defense ministers and a former deputy defense chief. Japan has spoken out about the importance of maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait as Beijing has increased pressure on Taiwan, which it claims as part of its territory. As Taiwan and Japan continue to deepen their political ties, the cultural relations between Taiwan and Japan run deep. Our reporter Louise Watt travelled to a part of the capital that is still reminiscent of Taiwan's Japanese past.
A slice of Japan, here in northern Taipei. The neighbourhood of Beitou has many reminders of Taiwan's past as a Japanese colony, including hot springs, developed by Japan around the turn of the 20th century. 68-year-old Hong Zheming was born after Taiwan came under China's control at the end of the Second World War, but he still remembers the Japanese influence on his life.
我们从小我的爸爸、我的妈妈，他就是读日本的学校嘛， 就受日本教育啊，像我们这一代就有接触到啊，家里也是有讲日文啊。
Today, buildings from the 50-year Japanese period and this restored Japanese train station attract visitors to Beito. There are other places like this across Taiwan that show its cultural ties with Japan run deep. Political ties were put on a closer track after Shinzo Abe became Japanese Prime Minister in 2012. Abe took a stronger stance on China than his predecessor. This sat well with Taiwan, long facing pressure from China, which won't recognise its sovereignty and claims it as part of its territory. After he stepped down as Prime Minister, Abe became more vocal in his support for Taiwan and said any attack on the island would present a serious threat to Japan. The fear in Tokyo is that a Chinese attack on Taiwan could be followed by another on Japanese-administered islands also claimed by China, or on Japan's Okinawa Islands. Now it appears Japanese support for Taiwan is continuing under Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. A delegation is visiting Taiwan this week, which includes 2 former defense ministers.
Because of their background, their positions in the previous cabinet, it really symbolized an important upgrade of the interaction between official interaction between Taiwan and Japan.
A Japanese defense white paper last week said Taiwan is an extremely important partner for Japan, sharing the same fundamental values such as freedom and democracy. The stability of the situation surrounding Taiwan is also critical for Japan's security and must be closely monitored with a sense of urgency. This follows a warning from Kishida in May on a trip to London that peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait must be maintained. Beijing responded by saying Japan is just finding excuses for its own military expansion. Back in Beito, Hong isn't concerned about the geopolitics of it all, but if war comes, he hopes Taiwan's friends step up, regardless of their reasons.
他是比较偏重自己的利益嘛。台湾如果被大陆拿走了，会影响到台湾海峡整个航道，它都会受影响。
For Hong and many other Taiwanese, the visit of the Japanese delegation is another sign of friendship between the 2 countries. And there are hopes that the cultural and fledgling diplomatic ties will turn into military ones too. Damon Lin and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's northwestern Miaoli County says it will stop the development of a controversial landfill project. The Kunyu landfill has been planned since 2002 and trial operations started this June. But locals have opposed it over concerns about the potential impact on farms and food and water safety. Last week, there were clashes at the landfill site during a midnight protest. The operator sent busloads of security guards to the site and they attacked protesters. Locals allege the men were hired thugs. The court ruled to halt further construction as an environmental impact assessment has not been carried out. The county says it will not appeal the decision. Protesters plan to stay on the site until mid-September when its permit expires. Fears of recession in the United States are increasing after the Federal Reserve raised interest rates by 75 basis points on Wednesday. It's the 4th Fed increase this year, taking the interest rate to a level between 2.25% and 2.5%. Together, these rises represent the fastest rate increase in 4 decades. When the cost of money rises too rapidly through interest rates, the growth of the economy can slow sharply, leading to a recession. However, the US Federal Reserve and the White House says the US economy is not in a recession because of job gains.
We're looking at the other economic indicators, the strong labor market. As I just listed out, we had 21 states last week where we saw unemployment was at 3% or lower. So everything that we are seeing currently right now does not show that we are in a recession.
The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, predicts that the world economy's growth is slowing, and Taiwan is not immune to the downward global trend. The Consumer Confidence Index of the country has plummeted to a 12-year low, while overall living costs are going up. Yu Jinghuang reports.
At a market in Taiwan, shoppers are snatching up guavas instead of mangoes, but the fruit's decreasing popularity has little to do with taste.
那芒果啦跟荔枝啦，价钱就蛮高的，比以前贵了三四倍以上应该有。
什么新鲜，什么便宜买什么。
Shoppers are vigilantly looking for bargains at a time when prices of many daily necessities are spiking. The Consumer Confidence Index in July fell to around 63 points, a 12-year low. The measurement takes into account employment prospects, family finances, consumer prices, and the local economic climate. It also factors in investments in the stock market and the likelihood of purchasing durable goods over the coming 6 months. Despite narrowing disposable income for many, rent is continuing to trend upwards. A tiny room like this one, which doesn't even have enough space for a desk or a closet, has become a hot item in Taipei, in a city where the average salary is a little more than $1,400. Many in the capital find themselves putting more than 1/3 of their monthly earnings towards rent. According to the latest data released by the government, the annual growth rate for residential rent in June hit 1.85%. The highest in 25 years. But analysts warn the real figures paint a starker picture.
那社会住宅虽然也会涨租，但是它涨幅的情况其实它并不像一般的私有住宅，它的涨幅会这么的明显。也就是说，总体实际租金的成长的情况呢，其实比官方的数字来得更高的。
Already hit hard by the pandemic, the global economy is likely to further weaken by the war in Ukraine, tighter monetary policies, and inflation. As difficult as 2022 is for the world, the IMF is warning the worst may be yet to come. And given Taiwan's economic climate, it's most likely that the island won't be excluded from that pessimism. Klein Wang and Yu Jinghuang for TaiwanPlus.
Inflation is soaring around the world, including in Taiwan. In June, the country recorded an almost 14-year high in inflation year on year. Our in-depth current affairs program, TaiwanPlus Point, spoke to Charles Liao, Fiscal Research Chief in the U.S. state of California government, and Ben Blanchard, Reuters Taiwan Bureau Chief, to discuss how inflation may impact the country.
First half of 2022 was the worst half year in the past 50 years since 1970. Yeah. So Dow Jones was down about 15%, and Taiwanese and Korean stock market has down more than 20%. So this has been just really a bumpy half year. On the other hand, interestingly, the fundamentals or the economic indicator has just not been that bad. For instance, the labor market is really the backbone of each economy. And then the U.S. labor market, the number has been really good. Running red hot. The unemployment rate is at 3.6%, close to pre-pandemic low. And U.S. has recovered pretty much all the job lost during the pandemic, which was at once 20 million jobs. So that makes people wonder what's going on, what's causing this great divergence. And I do believe there are two reasons. One is inflation, the other one is uncertainties. There's a saying that business don't like interest rate hike, but they hate uncertainties. Because uncertainty, they don't know what to anticipate. They don't know how to plan for the future. For instance, the Meta, the Facebook parent company of Facebook, they just reduced their hiring from 10,000 people to 6,000 people for 2022. So you can see that businesses are being very timid at this time of uncertainty.
Ben, so we know that central banks around the world seem to have different measures in this interesting timing. How is Taiwan central banks reacting to all these?
So far this year, we've had 2 interest rate rises by the central bank at their quarterly meetings. We had one in March, and then we just had our second one in June. Now, we've seen that inflation for June reached an almost 14-year high of 3.59% for Taiwan. Now, for year on year. Now, for Taiwan, that looks quite bad, right? Because it's 14-year high. But actually, comparatively speaking, Taiwan's inflation rate is still much lower than, say, the United States and also the Eurozone. So Taiwan has a different set of economic data that it's looking at. Obviously, Taiwan does pay attention to what decisions the Fed makes, and traditionally, Taiwan Central Bank meets basically the day after the Fed has its rate-setting meeting. So their next quarterly meeting is going to be in the middle of September, and the wide expectation amongst economists is that the interest rate is going to go up again. Now, the question, of course, is by what rate does that go up? So the last two interest rate hikes we've had in Taiwan have been by 0.25%. When you look at what policymakers have been saying about the economy here, actually we're not doing too badly here. And they point to things like Taiwan's economy obviously is very much driven by semiconductors, by tech, right? And actually so far the performance from these companies has been quite good. In fact, Foxconn, the very important Taiwanese assembler of iPhones, they've actually raised their business outlook for the year.
Up ahead on TaiwanPlus, great news for comic book fans. Taiwan is holding its first comic expo in 2 years. Stay with us.
Good local time, everyone. Welcome to Innovative Minds with Audrey Tong.
I would say one thing that I think the biggest difference is, do we see cuisine or culinary as a culture or as tourism? It should be under culture. Every Taiwanese should learn Taiwan flavor history. For example, when I was in Singapore, I represent Singapore to Paris to cook in the embassy of Singapore for all the ambassadors coming from around the world to show Singapore cuisine, which doesn't make any sense. I'm Taiwanese. Culinary is the best tool for us to show who we are, our identity.
Hey everyone, I'm Andre Chang. I'll see you on TaiwanPlus.
I'm Audrey Tong. See you on TaiwanPlus.
For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please make sure to download the TaiwanPlus app.
打开。A beautiful yellowfin tuna， 我放下来太重了。没吃过猪肉，才看到猪脚路啊。Very nice。
OK，
好。
Bubble tea has become such a big hit in the US that when the bubble tea crisis happened back in 2021, the country was hit hard. Did you know that these chewy tapioca bowls are actually from Taiwan? That's right, it's also where the first bubble tea was born. We started to realize that there's a host of toppings we could add to our teas. If you have ever been to a bubble tea shop, you might have heard something like 无糖少冰去冰半糖. But what does that mean exactly?
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Top rights experts from the UN are urging Hong Kong to repeal a national security law that was imposed by Beijing in 2020. The panel says it is deeply concerned about the overly broad interpretation of the law, pointing out that more than 200 people, including 12 children, have been arrested since it came into force. Ryan Kirkpatrick reports.
The United Nations Human Rights Committee has issued a scathing appraisal of the harsh national security law imposed on Hong Kong by Beijing 2 years ago. It's the committee's first review of human rights in Hong Kong since the pro-democracy protests of 2019 and the crackdown that followed.
The committee was deeply concerned about the overly broad interpretation of Hong Kong's national security law, the NSL, which was passed by the National People's Congress of China without consultation with the Hong Kong public.
Under the national security law, the crimes of secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces carry punishment of up to life imprisonment. Since its implementation, it has been used to arrest over 200 protesters, journalists, and pro-democracy politicians. While Beijing is not party to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Hong Kong is, since before its handover from Britain to China in 1997. As a signatory, its adherence to the treaty is subject to regular review.
The committee urged Hong Kong to take action to repeal the national security law and, in the interim, refrain from applying it.
But according to a U.S. lawyer who was jailed in Hong Kong after a run-in with police during the 2019 protests, the rot runs far deeper than cases tried under the national security law.
Sedition is being used a lot. They interpret sedition to be included as a national security offense. That means that all of the rights and protections that are supposed to exist in the common law system are stripped away from sedition defendants. Their right to bail is stripped away. Their right to a jury trial is stripped away. Their right to an independent judge instead of a national security judge is stripped away. And that's why you now have this incredible humanitarian crisis of just hundreds of people who have been thrown in prisons without trial.
Bickett was deported after serving his sentence. He says there are thousands more cases like his in Hong Kong, outside the national security law, that resulted from abuses of a once vaunted judicial system.
Riot is being used in a vast way to throw people in prison. You've got people going to prison on weapons charges for having laser pointers. You have all kinds of crazy stuff and ways that they're sort of stretching these things. That is the vast majority of political prisoners in Hong Kong right now, and the vast majority of people waiting for trial in Hong Kong.
Despite the verdict from the UN, Hong Kong's highest officials remain powerless. Only Beijing can repeal the national security law it's imposed. But the hundreds of Hong Kongers who have been detained under this law are an illustration of how quickly a justice system can go from a regional exemplar to the subject of global censure. Ryan Hill-Kilpatrick for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan has confirmed its first family cluster of the BA.5 subvariant of COVID-19. Health authorities say 2 family members of a factory worker from Kaohsiung in southern Taiwan were infected. The 5-year-old and 10-year-old boys are Taiwan's first child BA.5 patients. 14 other people at the factory have been infected with COVID as well. And tests are being done to see if they also have the BA.5 subvariant. Taiwan's Pandemic Response Task Force is warning that BA.5 infections could increase.
如果这个有 BA.5 的这个疫情，应该会在8月中下旬开始了。主要不是看它的这个确诊数是多少，主要是要看它第一个就是说在医疗量能上面有没有受到这个压迫了第二个就是说它的重症跟死亡率有没有这个比例上面有没有特别的这个增高。
Taiwan's chess team is in Chennai in India for the world's biggest chess tournament. A record 2,000 players from 187 countries are taking part in this year's games. The 44th Chess Olympiad was supposed to take place in Moscow, but after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the International Chess Federation moved the event and India won the hosting rights. Our reporter Sandy Chi spoke with 14-year-old Sophie Tsai, the youngest member of Taiwan's team, ahead of their departure.
What do you love about playing chess?
I love that every game is different and there are always endless possibilities that chess offers. Like you can meet new friends, play new openings, and go to different countries around the world.
How do you feel about being the youngest player to represent Taiwan? Do you have a lot of pressure?
Well, I'm very honored to be representing Taiwan and also be playing board 1 at the Olympiad. And honestly, I try to not give myself a lot of pressure, and I just tell myself that it's just for fun and practice.
So what have you learned from the games that you can apply to, let's say, the challenges and difficulties in your life?
I play a lot of sports at school, such as like soccer and basketball. And chess teaches you to make decisions like quickly, and you have to make the right decision. However, like when you play sports, you have to make decisions quickly. And I think that playing chess helps me to make good decisions faster, and my thought process is improving as well as my chess level.
Comic book fans have flocked to Taiwan's first comic expo in 2 years.
今天钱有带够吗？当然，带很多啊，带了1万多以上啊。
The event normally attracts over 100,000 people. The 2022 comic exhibition runs through this weekend, with over 100 companies taking part, including 2 major Japanese animation companies. Since 2018, Taiwan's comic and gaming industries have grown to over $2.3 billion in value. Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Finally, we leave you with images of a 6-year-old Indian skateboard enthusiast who won several titles of skate competitions in the United Arab Emirates, showing off her skills. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please download the TaiwanPlus app. Stay safe and see you next time.